But Professor Sherlock, to understand American history, we've only got to study about what's happening in America, right? Wrong. In order to get a good understanding of American history, you have to also have an understanding of world events that ended up affecting how America acts, how America reacts, and the whole atmosphere. To give you 4 examples of things that happened on an international level that directly affected American policies, American economics, American way of life, are the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and the space race. And all of these things affect a big part of American history, and they were all causes and results and effects of how America deals with communism. So first of all, you may say, well, why do a lot of Americans dislike communism? Why is communism antithetical to American beliefs and values? Well, there's too many reasons to name, but right off the top, I'll give you 3. 1, communism kills its own people. 2, communism destroys individual freedom. And 3, communism always lowers the standard of living for its own people. So it kills its own people. China under Mao Zedong killed 60 million Chinese. The USSR killed over 40 million of its own people. Pol Pot in Cambodia, he killed over 2 million people, which was 25% of the Cambodian population at the time. So there's no doubt that communism kills millions of people, and not just in wars against others, but I'm talking about killing their own citizens. Communism also destroys individual freedom for their own people. One example is Tiananmen Square in China, where they wouldn't allow their people to speak or protest or say anything against the Chinese government. Another example coming from China is China's use of female infanticide and forced abortions. Third reason is communist governments always, without a doubt, lower the standard of living of their citizens. So if you want to look at that, look at examples of Cuba, look at Venezuela, or one of the best examples is compare communist North Korea to non-communist South Korea, and just look at the different standard of living between their people. And like I said, do your own research and find out for yourself why these things are so terrible. But if you want to say look at the official U.S. stance on why communism is bad, in addition to things I mentioned, I'm going to mention 2 things where it's actually officially documented. And the first is in United States law. The United States Law 103-199, also known as the Friendship Act, states, since 1917, the rulers of empires and international communism led by Vladimir I. Lenin and Mao Zedong have been responsible for the deaths of over 100 million victims in an unprecedented imperial communist holocaust through conquests, revolutions, civil wars, purges, wars by proxy, and other violent means. The imperialist regimes of international communism have brutally suppressed human rights, national independence, religious liberty, intellectual freedom, cultural life of the peoples of over 40 captive nations. So this was an act, the Freedom Act, which is enacted into U.S. law. And if any of you thinking that, well, that's just a right-wing view, that law was actually signed by a Democratic president, President Clinton. Another piece of historical document that documents communism and the U.S.'s opposition to it is NSC 68. NSC 68 was a top secret report compiled by the U.S. Department of State Policy Planning staff in April of 1950. This 58-page memorandum was one of the most influential documents ever produced by the U.S. government during the Cold War. It was not declassified until 1975, and its authors argued that one of the most pressing threats for the United States was the hostile designs of the Soviet Union. These authors concluded that the Soviet threat would soon be augmented by even more powerful weapons, including nuclear weapons, and that the Soviet arsenal would continue to grow. They argued that the best course of action was to respond in kind with a massive buildup of U.S. military strength in order to combat Russian aggressiveness. The authors of NSC 68 also rejected a renewal of U.S. isolationism, fearing that this would lead to the Soviet domination of Europe and Asia and leave the United States marooned within the Western Hemisphere, cut off from any allies and resources that it needed to defend itself from Soviet encroachment. Finally, like all good historians, I would like to show you some other sources. I encourage you to all do your own research, and here I'm going to finish up with 3 great sources for you to look at for more information. The first is the NSC 68 document, which can be found in the Truman Library. Go to www.trumanlibrary.org. You can look up information on the Freedom Act by going to www.congress.gov. And finally, a great site that documents all the atrocities of many, many, many communist regimes is www.victimsofcommunism.org. Don't take my word for it. Do the research yourself, become an American scholar, and find out why all good Americans can't stand communism.